Garrett, we've got some more hot takes to get to. A lot of people utilize that feature on our season projection surveys that went out a couple weeks ago. That was an extra question we threw in there, and there was a lot of fun responses. This one from our Big 12 survey got me pretty excited. I'm not going to lie. So I'm not going to throw in names with these because we did say that everything's going to be anonymous here. But I will shout out the person that said Utah and Kansas State will meet in the Big 12 championship at 12-0. I did check. They do not play in the regular season, so this is possible.
Yeah.
And I got to say, it's not the most outlandish thing I've heard about the Big 12 this offseason. I could definitely look. I'm late to the Utah bandwagon. You guys have made that abundantly clear, but I'm fully on the Utah bandwagon this year. I wrote the preview articles for both of these teams that you guys can subscribe and see in our Substack. I'm high on both of them. Spoiler alert. I'm really high on both of these teams. Cam Rising and Avery Johnson could very well end up being the best two quarterbacks in the entire conference. And Avery Johnson, if he's as advertised, could be getting some buzz to go to New York at the end of the year. 12-0 is a whole different animal. And this conference loves to cannibalize itself. But again, I've seen crazier takes about the Big 12 this offseason.
Well, you've seen crazier takes about the Big 12 because a lot of people are talking about Colorado. So, I
knew you were going to say that. As soon as you started talking, I knew that was going to come out of your mouth.
I mean, look, that's why you heard crazier things about the Big 12 is because some people think that Colorado is going to go 12-0. And that's, that is a take. It's, not necessarily one that I'll approve, but it's certainly a take. I think for me, I feel a lot better about Utah reaching that point than I do about Kansas State. I want to kind of go through the schedules real quick, just make sure we're, looking at all these.
Before you do, both of these schedules are about as good as you could possibly ask for. When on the Utah preview, I literally wrote, if you could ask Kyle Whittingham to draw up a perfect Big 12 intro schedule, his draw up would probably be pretty close to what he actually got.
Oh yeah, no, it's pretty soft. I'm not gonna lie. There's a good chance that they could run through this. So let me just start with Utah always plays great defense. They're always going to be a great defensive team. That's not really true for a lot of the Big 12. And so I think they already have an edge in all of those games just at the fact that they're going to play physical defense. They're going to dominate some lines of scrimmage, and that's always a good thing, right? So even in a game where maybe their skill talent isn't quite there or it's a tough, hostile environment, your defense travels, right? That's going to be something that goes with them to any of these games. But if I'm looking at their schedule, Utah, they got Southern Utah, Baylor, at Utah State, at Oklahoma State could be tricky. We'll have to see what happens with Ollie Gordon, unfortunately. But,
that's a big wrinkle in the schedule.
We will see what happens. If they don't have Ollie Gordon, that'll be a cakewalk. If not, that should be a really fun and entertaining game. Arizona State, TCU, Houston, BYU, Colorado, Iowa State, UCF. Tell me where you're scared because I'm just not scared of that schedule. Especially not with the veteran Cam Rising coming back off injury with something to prove. I just don't see how that's a tough schedule for Utah.
Veteran is an understatement, first of all, in his 7th year of eligibility. But
a veteran of the Vietnam War actually was what I meant.
Yes. Yeah, I think he fought in Vietnam and the first Gulf War, actually.
That's a chance.
Yeah. So the stretch that I'm looking at is September 14th through the 28th because 2 road games, one at an in-state G5 school. I don't care who you are; those are always tricky. Those always get spicy. When you take a look at Utah State, they have their own problems right now. So maybe
they're down a head coach.
Maybe the schedule is just completely opening wide like the Red Sea. But
yeah,
Utah State's going to be plucky in that game. They're at home and they're an in-state rival that's a G5 school. They're going to be hyped up to host Big Brother in that game. You're absolutely right. Oklahoma State is probably their toughest road game, but they might be without their best player at that point. It would not surprise me if Ollie Gordon has a 3-game suspension and is back for that game with fresh legs, but that remains to be seen. So we'll just assume that he's going to be there for right now. That will be their toughest road game, Ollie Gordon or not. And then you get Arizona at home, a plucky team that returns a really nice quarterback in Fafita. After that, though, if they're sitting at 5-0 after the Arizona game, show me a loss because they will not be challenged again. And so I guess TCU might give them a run for their money. I really don't know what to think about TCU. They get that
Not
game at
in
home, though.
Utah. I don't think in Utah.
I don't think they're good enough to beat Utah. I totally agree. Rivalry game against BYU, but that's coming out of a bye week. I don't think they see another huge challenge until Iowa State comes to town on November 22nd. And even that's at home. So,
it's at home. That's my thing. Is TCU is at home for Utah. Iowa State is
when's
at
the last
home.
time Iowa State played a game, or TCU? I guess TCU played at Colorado 2 years ago, but when's the last time a team like Iowa State played a game at altitude? Has that ever happened in the history of their program? I'm sure
I'd have
Cyclone
to go back and check, but I would doubt that it's a frequent occurrence.
The teams in the Big 12 are not used to that, and I think it's going to be an
Yeah.
adjustment for some of them this year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see where the schedule goes for Utah. I do think you're right that they got to get through the beginning part. I will say I think the advantage for them in the start of their schedule is they don't necessarily start that fast. They go Southern Utah, Baylor, at Utah State. Those are kind of
That
like
Baylor game's a non-conference game. Just
yeah,
throwing
and it's
that
at
out
home.
there. But
It is at home, so
yeah,
again, even where you're like, ooh, Baylor, they could be not like it's at home, but if you can get your feet underneath you, figure out the style of offense you're playing, right, like figure out all that again, then I don't think you're really worried about Oklahoma State or Arizona. I don't think you are. Now, understanding what Utah is, they could drop both of those games just because they lose games they're not supposed to. And then they could still go 10-2, make their way into the championship game, and grab, the conference championship and a playoff berth. So that's just kind of what it feels like Utah could do this year. But again, looking at it, not really concerned about their schedule. I am curious what you had to say about Kansas State. I'm not necessarily as high yet on Kansas State. I think I've kind of held back a little bit on buying in with the Wildcats this year. I think my big concern is yes, you've got a young quarterback, very talented, lots of hype and praise. He's still young. He's still got to figure some stuff out. Hasn't necessarily shown that he's going to be a star yet. He's shown a lot of flashes where you're like, oh, I could see something there. Hasn't shown necessarily that he is a star. And they did lose their offensive coordinator, and that's never easy. So I'm kind of curious what you think with Kansas State this year.
Kansas State, I think, is far less likely to go 12-0 than Utah. I don't know that either one will. To go back to the actual hot take, I don't know that either one will. I think Utah is more likely than Kansas State because, it is a gamble to have Avery Johnson in there. It is a gamble to send away a championship winning quarterback in Will Howard and have him be picked up by one of the premier programs in the country. Obviously, he's going to be a good college quarterback. Now, Avery Johnson's ceiling is certainly higher than Will Howard. I think by the time that Avery Johnson leaves Manhattan, we will be regarding him as better than Will Howard as a whole. Certainly a better NFL prospect, but I this year in a vacuum, it's a gamble. And he does have what he does have going for him that maybe even better than Cam Rising. I think he has better weapons around him. I think having DJ Giddens as a safety blanket out of the backfield, he's got some fun wide receivers. He did lose Ben Sennett, the tight end that was their leading receiver last year, but they brought in some nice guys from the portal. Not only did they lose their offensive coordinator, though, they also lost 4 out of their 5 starters on the offensive line. So that's going to be
not great.
And, if you're looking at potential upsets, both of these two teams just love to start slow, by the way, for whatever reason.
Right.
Kansas State and Utah in the past have really struggled with slow starts. Week 2, Kansas State goes down to New Orleans to play Tulane.
Yeah.
Tulane has some of the best returning graded pass rushers per Pro Football Focus in the entire college football. So you're telling me that you're replacing 4 out of 5 starters on the offensive line. You're going to go up against that pass rush on the road? Willie Fritz or not, that's going to be a tough game for the Wildcats. After that, though, if they can get through Oklahoma State undefeated, kind of similar to Utah, though. They have the tough stretch at the start. Their close is definitely tougher than
Yeah.
Utah's because they have to go to West Virginia. They host Kansas, but I love Kansas, Garrett. I know you love Kansas this year. They haven't beaten the Wildcats in 15 years. I
So
got
they
to see
do.
them do it before I predict them to do it, right?
Yeah.
So, and then Farmageddon on the road to end the season. So the closing stretch is certainly tougher for Kansas State, but if they're sitting there at 5-0 after the Oklahoma State game, they're gonna have all the momentum in the world to carry through it.
Yeah. Well, and I certainly see a lot more opportunities for losses on Kansas State's schedule. But I think you're right. Like, I think that they're a more talented team overall. I think that they can get it done. It's really going to be up to the young quarterback to just prove it, right? A lot of people get their hopes into just one player. One good quarterback does not a good football team make. However, if you have a great quarterback and if he can develop into something, he can mask a lot of problems, right? He can mask a bad offensive line by being able to scramble, get outside the pocket, extend a play, right? He can mask that by making defenses pay for being over aggressive, right? Dodge a blitz and then, take off 20 yards down the field. It's going to be up to him to see like what he can do in his development, what he can do in terms of becoming a true dual threat quarterback. I know he's got great legs, being able to pass the football effectively down the field, push the ball a little bit more. That's going to be big against teams like Arizona, Oklahoma State, maybe even Tulane could get a little bit chippy there at the beginning of the season. Because if he can't do that, Arizona, Oklahoma State, a couple of teams that can score points. These are teams that can definitely put up some points. They can definitely score. And so if you don't keep up with that, if you get a little behind and you have to rely on the arm of Johnson, you might be in the spot where you're like, yeah, this isn't really what we were hoping for. And yeah, it could end up bad, but that's not me saying I think that'll happen. I'm saying that's where the downside could be, right? No, it's going to be amazing, right? All the Kansas State fans who are already saying, no, he's awesome, he's incredible, he won't mess up. Like, he's still young. We've seen quarterbacks get figured out from one offseason to the next, especially when you're a young guy. You've got to be able to push your talent and your game to the next level.
Gracious him.